We all think we know the story of the crucifixion, right? It's one of the most famous stories in the world. But what if I told you there's a version with unique details, a different cast of characters, and a very specific point of view you might have overlooked? Well, that's the Gospel of Luke. In this explainer, we're going to break down what makes Luke's account of the crucifixion so different. So, what is it that makes Luke's telling so distinct? We're going to dig into the analysis of scholars like Dr. Daniel Darko to uncover the powerful message Luke was trying to send about Jesus' final hours. And you'll see it's a story that really zeroes in on innocence, forgiveness, and faith, coming from some very unexpected places. All right, so Luke doesn't just jump straight to the cross. Nope. He starts us off in a courtyard with this moment of intense personal failure, and then a series of so-called trials where, honestly, justice is just gone. From the very beginning, Luke frames this whole thing to be deeply personal and psychologically intense. Now, in some of the other Gospels, Peter's kind of moving around. Not in Luke. Luke locks the action down. All three denials happen right there in the same courtyard, and this makes the scene incredibly tense because Jesus is right there. He can hear everything. And then comes the gut punch. After that third denial, Luke writes that the Lord turned and looked at Peter. That single look, that moment of eye contact, that's a detail unique to Luke, and it transforms a simple denial into this absolutely heartbreaking personal confrontation. And it's not just where it happens, it's also who is doing the accusing. Dr. Darko points out that Luke is really specific here. It starts with a servant girl, which for a powerful man like Peter is already a deep humiliation. Then it escalates, with two other men. While Matthew and Mark have a crowd of bystanders chiming in, Luke keeps it focused, really dialing up that personal pressure on Peter. It's all part of how he's uniquely shaping this story. So while all this is happening with Peter outside, Jesus is inside, being mocked, and we really have to understand what mocking meant in that culture. This was not just teasing. In an honor-shame society, public ridicule was a weapon. It was designed to completely destroy a person's identity and social standing. It was a form of psychological torture, seen as just as damaging as a physical assault. So when they blindfold Jesus and say, prophesy, they're trying to annihilate him socially before they do it physically. From there, Jesus is just thrown into this relentless bureaucratic nightmare. He's passed from one authority to another, and the whole process reveals way less about his guilt and way more about the leader's absolute determination to see him condemned no matter what. You can see it's like a game of political hot potato. He goes from the high priest to the Sanhedrin, the supreme Jewish council, then he's hauled before Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate tries to pass the buck to Herod, who happens to be in town. Herod just mocks him and sends him right back to Pilate. This back and forth isn't about finding truth. It's about finding someone, anyone, willing to issue a death sentence. Now check this out. When they finally get Jesus in front of Pilate, the Sanhedrin knows their religious arguments won't fly, so they change tactics. They frame it all politically. They accuse him of being a revolutionary, an enemy of Rome. They claim he tells people not to pay taxes, which, by the way, is something Luke's gospel never actually says he did. And the big one, they say he's claiming to be a king, a direct challenge to Caesar. These charges were specifically designed to force a Roman governor's hand. And this right here is a huge theme in Luke's gospel. Dr. Darko emphasizes that Luke places the blame squarely on the leadership. In his account, it's not a frenzied mob demanding the crucifixion. It's the council, the chief priests, and the scribes who are driving this. Meanwhile, the Roman authorities, Pilate and Herod, both look at Jesus and find no reason to convict him. In fact, Pilate declares him innocent 3 separate times. The injustice is being orchestrated from the top down. So as Jesus is led away, his inner circle is just gone. Peter has denied him, the others have scattered. But right then, Luke starts to introduce a whole new set of characters, unexpected people, outsiders, who step into the story and bear witness in these surprising ways. This is classic Luke, showing us that true faith often comes from the most unlikely places. So who are these people? First, there's Simon of Cyrene, a man from North Africa who was just pulled from the crowd and forced to carry the cross. Then you have a large crowd following, and Luke specifically points out a group of women from Jerusalem who are openly wailing and mourning for him. These aren't the disciples he chose. They're strangers, people from the margins, who show up and offer compassion when his closest friends have disappeared. And in a moment that is just so characteristic of Luke, Jesus actually turns his attention to these mourning women. Even as he's walking toward his own execution, he speaks to them, not about his own suffering, but about the terrible future that's awaiting them and their city. It's this incredible moment of prophetic compassion, where he's still focused on others, even at the very end. Now we arrive at the place of the crucifixion, which Luke simply calls the skull. And it's here, in Jesus' final moments, that Luke gives us some of the most powerful and unique scenes in the whole story. And they're all centered on the theme of forgiveness, a message that's central to his entire gospel. So while the rulers and soldiers are mocking him, so is one of the criminals being crucified right next to him. But the other criminal actually speaks up. He rebukes the first one and then says, "This man has done nothing wrong." It's another declaration of innocence, but this time it's from someone sharing his exact same fate. This whole conversation between the condemned is a detail you'll only find in Luke's gospel, and it really shows how the truth can emerge from the darkest places. But the crucial part is Jesus' response. When the repentant criminal asks to be remembered, Jesus gives him this incredible promise of immediate salvation. This promise of paradise from the cross is such a profound statement of grace, offered at the very last moment. It's really a cornerstone of Luke's narrative, showing that it is never too late for redemption. Throughout this whole final sequence, Luke gives us 4 key witnesses who all testify to Jesus' innocence. You have the repentant criminal. You have the Roman centurion who, at the moment of death, says, "Certainly this man was innocent." You have the crowd who walks away beating their breasts. And finally, you have Joseph of Arimathea. Luke is building an overwhelming case, not through arguments, but through the testimony of all these unlikely voices. The final act in Luke's story completely defies all expectations for someone who was crucified, which was the most shameful death imaginable. Instead of the body being just unceremoniously dumped somewhere, what happens next is a complete reversal, emphasizing Jesus' honor, even in death. Just look at this comparison. The normal fate was total dishonor. The body would be left to rot or tossed in a common grave. But Jesus receives an honorable burial. His body is formally requested from the governor, it's wrapped in a valuable linen shroud, and he's laid in a new, freshly cut tomb. This is the burial of a respected figure, not a state criminal. And this honorable burial is provided by Joseph of Arimathea, which is the final brilliant twist in Luke's story about outsiders. See, Joseph was an insider, a member of the Sanhedrin, the very council that condemned Jesus. But Luke is very careful to tell us that he had not consented to their decision and action. He uses his status to act against his own group and honor the man they executed. He's the ultimate insider who chooses to stand with the outsider. So this whole powerful structure really reveals Luke's core message. He shows us how the institutional leaders, both religious and political, orchestrate this terrible injustice, even while admitting Jesus is innocent. And yet, at every key moment, Luke gives the final word to the outsiders: a condemned criminal, a Roman soldier, grieving women, and a dissenting council member. They're the ones who recognize the truth. And the question Luke leaves us with is, why? What is he telling us about where true sight and righteousness can actually be found?